What's up guys, Gleb here, and today I wanted to share with you some of my thoughts about this bad boy right here. This is the Panasonic GH5, Panasonic's newest mirrorless camera. So I picked it up a couple of months ago because I wanted a camera that primarily focused more on video versus stills. I use my Nikon for stills and it's great for that, but I wanted something that is a bit more video oriented. But at the same time, I didn't want something that only focuses on video because I wanted something that I can also take with me hiking or maybe on small trips or walking around in the city that wasn't quite as big and bulky as a full-size DSLR. So the GH5 kind of fit the bill. It offered a lot of different features for both stills and video, and it was a nice and small package that I could bring with me wherever I go. So today I wanted to share with you some of the thoughts that I had about this camera. Let's get started. So before I jump into the review, I wanted to briefly go over some of the features that this camera has to offer. First, we have a 20 megapixel micro four thirds sensor, and the sensor is stabilized within the body, which means that no matter what lens you put on it, you're always going to have some benefit of image stabilization. Second, for video, we have 4K up to 60 frames per second, which is pretty amazing. You can also do full HD up to 180 frames per second, and the camera even supports Cinema 4K up to 24 frames per second. If you don't know what Cinema 4K is, it's a little bit of a wider aspect ratio 4K format basically. So it looks a little bit more cinematic and can give your videos a more film-like look. Further, for video, it also has 422 10-bit recording, which is pretty awesome. If you don't know what that does, is basically your footage will contain more color information than your standard 8-bit footage, which means that if you go grade your footage later and you want to pull more colors and extract more light out of it, it basically gives you a lot more flexibility versus standard footage. Back on the still side, it also has 4K and 6K shooting modes, which is essentially a really fast burst shooting rate. In 6K, it will take 18 megapixel pictures at 30 frames per second. So if you're doing some very fast action and you really want to capture every small detail in stills, you can set it to that and just hold the shutter button down and it'll keep shooting and shooting until you basically let go, or until the memory card fills up. Or until the camera reaches the buffer limit, which I have not done yet, but also I haven't used that mode extensively. On the body itself, we have dual card slots, which is really nice. You can set video to go to one of the cards and then the stills go to the other. You can do relay recording where one card fills up and then it just moves on to the next one. Or you can record the same thing to both cards, so you always have a backup just in case one of the cards gets lost, stolen, or fails on you, or something happens to it. Pretty much you always have a backup, which if you're doing professional work can be really nice. On the back of the camera, we also have a joystick and a touchscreen LCD that flips and tilts around, which is really awesome if you're vlogging or if you're shooting a video of yourself kind of like this. And the touchscreen just makes it so much easier to navigate, and every camera should have a touchscreen at this point because it's just super convenient. And then over on the left side of the camera, we do have a USB Type-C port, and it is 3.0, so you can transfer your files from the camera to your computer really fast. You also get a full-size HDMI port, which means you don't have to fiddle with any kind of adapters. You just get a single HDMI cable, plug it in from this camera directly into a monitor so you can view your work on a bigger screen. And then you also have your standard headphone and microphone jack, and the microphone jack sits a little bit higher, so when you have the screen flip forward, it doesn't get caught on the wire for the microphone, which is really convenient for vlogging or if you really want to move your screen back and forth quite a lot. The body itself is made out of magnesium alloy and it is weather sealed. Now I haven't tested that just because I don't really want to put it under any bad weather if I don't have to, but it's nice knowing that it is weather sealed just in case you're caught out on the shoot in bad weather or in dust, cold, rain, pretty much anything like that. This camera can handle it. So those are just some of the features that this camera has to offer. There are many more features that it would take forever to list them in the video. So next I'm going to move on to the actual review. I'll start with things I liked and then finish up with things that I think could be improved upon in this camera, and then just offer some final thoughts in the end. So let's get started with things I liked. First, let's talk about the image quality. The image quality on this camera is phenomenal. Now, even though I primarily bought it for video, I wanted to briefly talk about the image quality of the stills, because I do use this camera for stills if I'm out hiking or if I'm out in the city like I mentioned earlier, because it's nice and small. So stills quality was still pretty important to me. So the stills that come out of this camera are excellent. They're sharp, their colors are nice and pleasant, they're very punchy, especially on JPEGs. If you're using the standard color profile, the RAW files also have pretty good flexibility in how you can change the colors or adjust the white balance. And the dynamic range on this camera is surprisingly impressive. Obviously, it's not going to be as good as a full frame camera or even an APS-C size sensor, but for a Micro Four Thirds sensor, it still handled pulling the details from the shadows or the highlights pretty well. So for stills quality, I think this camera does a really good job. And for the ISO performance, I found that it does pretty well up to about ISO 3200. Pushing it beyond that, you do start to see very noticeable noise in the shadows and in dark areas. Even at 3200, don't expect to be able to pull the detail out of the shadows a whole lot because you will start seeing a lot of noise. Next, let's move on to the video quality of this camera, which is pretty much what it's all about. This camera, even though it can shoot stills, you can tell that it's more video centric just by the feature set that it has and all the video centric features that it does have to offer. The video quality on this camera is awesome in both Full HD and 4K. In Full HD, you get pretty sharp and very detailed footage, and with very pleasant colors using the standard color profile, kind of like the JPEGs that come out of this camera. The colors are nice and pleasant. The 4K footage from this camera comes out looking even sharper and even more pleasant than the Full HD footage. With the 4K footage, the colors are very punchy and very poppy, and everything is super detailed and super clear. If you're looking to color grade your footage, I've been using the Cinelike D color profile that's included on this camera. I think it works really well. I didn't spring for the optional $100 Vlog upgrade just because I haven't found the need for it yet. I've been totally fine with using Cinelike D. I think the footage grades really well, and the camera still preserves a lot of detail within the shot. Using the higher frame rates on this camera is pretty awesome. Having the ability to shoot 60 frames in 4K, I mean, that's pretty cool. You can use that to really slow down your footage. You can add more dramatic effect to it and just create that overall like slower, more dynamic feel into it by slowing down 60 frame per second footage down to 30 frames per second, basically having the speed of it. In Full HD, you can also shoot up to 180 frames per second. I personally found 180 frames to look a little bit soft for my taste, but at 120 frames per second, the camera handles it really well. So I do like using that over the 180 frames per second. You also have the 422 10-bit recording. While I haven't used it that much, I have done some comparison shots, and honestly, I couldn't tell too much of a difference between 8-bit and 10-bit footage, but that may be because I am only using a Full HD monitor. I haven't picked up a 4K monitor yet, and it's an 8-bit monitor, so maybe I just don't see the color changes or the differences in color on my monitor per se. If you have a 4K monitor, maybe you'll be able to better notice the difference between the two video formats. I, however, have not noticed too much of a difference, so I kind of just stuck to shooting the 8-bit format. Plus, I've been using Adobe Premiere, and if you haven't heard, they did have some compatibility issues when this camera first came out with it, and they just recently released an update for Adobe Premiere in order to support that 10-bit footage. So overall, I haven't used it too much, but it's still nice to have the benefits that it offers, just in case I need to use it. I think this camera also offers really good low light performance despite its smaller sensor. Last weekend, I went to Vegas and I just took some test shots in low light, and I didn't notice too much noise. If you pay pretty close attention, you can notice the noise in darker areas or in shadows, but overall, I didn't find it very distracting, nor was it like big splotches of noise. It was very fine and almost like a film-like grain, so I didn't find it too distracting. Overall, I think at least up to ISO 1600, this camera handles it pretty well. Up to 3200, you do kind of start seeing a little bit more noise, but if you're shooting in 4K, I think it handles it really, really well. Next, I wanted to briefly touch on the performance of the camera. I think the camera is super quick and super responsive. When you turn it on, the camera is pretty quick to boot up and it's ready to start taking pictures right off the bat. When navigating the menus or pressing any of the buttons, there's virtually no lag, at least nothing that I have noticed. And it's just really quick and really swift to respond, really quick to change settings if you need to. Overall, very good performance. The image stabilization on this camera is amazing, especially when paired with the right lens. I mean, you can be practically walking around and your footage looks almost steady. Not quite how it would if you were to put on the gimbal, but still steady enough for casual vlogging or maybe some run and gun shooting. The battery performance on this camera I thought was really good. Even when you're shooting a lot of footage, the battery still holds up pretty well and for quite a long time. I don't know exactly how long, I didn't really test it or anything like that, but I thought it was long enough that I didn't have to switch batteries very often. The other thing I also really like on the performance side is the fact that this camera has no recording limit. So once you hit that 30-minute mark, the camera just keeps on going without stopping until either the battery dies or the memory card is full, which is really nice if you're recording a really long session and you don't want to have your camera stop recording and for you to have to hit the record button again. So no recording limit, it's pretty awesome. Now I wanted to talk about the ergonomics of this camera, which I absolutely loved. So this camera is a little bit bigger than a lot of the mirrorless cameras that are on the market. And I don't think that's a negative. I think that's actually a very good thing, because I come from shooting a DSLR. I shoot a Nikon D750, and for me, having that big deep grip and a bigger size body it just feels more comfortable to me. So I really like the bulkier size of this camera. I think the deep grip on it is fantastic. It makes it really easy to hold the camera, especially with a heavier lens on it, and I think it just adds overall more stability, and it really fits my hand pretty well. I also really like the button placement on this camera. Panasonic has done a good job of differentiating each button so you know which setting or which button you're hitting without even having to look at the camera. You can tell which button it is just by feeling it. All three of the dials feel very nice and very clicky, and also including that touchscreen and that joystick makes navigation a whole lot easier. The body of the camera feels really solid and does not feel like a cheap plastic toy. It actually feels like a very robust and rugged camera. Next, I want to talk about some of the other features that this camera has. Some of these features are not something that I'm probably going to use every single day, but it's still kind of cool that it has them, and it's still kind of cool that you are able to access those features. So first, this is actually a feature I do use a lot, and it's the focus peaking and manual focus assist. If you're using a manual lens, or if you have your camera set to manual focus, it's really nice to have that peaking show up, or have the camera zoom into the subject so you can really nail that focus and then bring it back out when you're actually taking this shot or starting to film your video. The focus peaking does work while recording video, which makes it really easy to manually pull focus while recording. I also enjoy the 6K and the 4K photo modes. Even though I haven't used them that much, I still think it's pretty cool that you can shoot 18 megapixel stills at 30 frames per second. You can scroll through the camera afterwards and kind of pick which ones you like. If you're doing the 4K photo burst, then you're getting 8 megapixel stills at 60 frames per second. So if you really wanted to capture like some very small or fine moment in a fraction that happens in a fraction of a second, you can use that mode to do so. Another feature that I really liked is the ability to switch into what they call a video priority display, where it prioritizes video settings over still settings. You can also change it so the camera, instead of showing the shutter speed and the ISO, will instead show you a shutter angle and gain if you're more used to that. So that's my kind of extensive list of things that I really liked about this camera, and there's a lot to like about it because it is a really good camera. However, no camera is without its flaws. Next, I wanted to talk about some of the things that could be improved upon. First, we'll start with the autofocus. Autofocus for this camera has been a topic of huge debate, with many people saying like it's pretty good, or some people saying it absolutely sucks. I personally found it to be pretty decent. I think it works pretty well in majority of situations. Sometimes it does tend to lose focus or pretty slow to find the subject to focus on. But for vlogging or for maybe basic run and gun style shooting, I think it works pretty well. It's definitely not on the level that you would get from Canon's dual pixel autofocus, but for most of the stuff that I do at least, it's pretty usable. If I wanted more control in the shot, or if I wanted the camera to focus more precisely, I simply switch it into manual focus mode. So in the end, I think the overall speed and the responsiveness of the autofocus is where it can really be improved. The next thing that I think could be improved on has something to do with the viewfinder and the live view of this camera. So this camera has something that's called constant preview. It's off by default, but you can turn it on, and what that does is basically shows you what your exposure is going to look like when you're looking through the viewfinder or using live view in stills. And the problem I have with it is that if you're using a very slow shutter speed, you actually start seeing the motion blur and the very, very huge lag in the viewfinder. I don't understand why they didn't just make it so when you have constant preview on, it just shows you the exposure without introducing the motion blur or showing you that the picture is going to be blurry. I already know that it's going to be blurry if I'm setting a low shutter speed, so there's no reason to show me that. The list of negatives for this camera is much shorter than the list of the positives that it offers, and there's about 3 more things that I'd like to point out that I wish could be improved upon. First, the placement of the display button. While all the other buttons on the camera are in a really good location, the display button is right in the middle of the grip, and I often found myself accidentally pressing it with my thumb and changing the way the display looks without even knowing it or without wanting to. I think that it's just in a poor location. I wish it was just moved to a different spot so you can't accidentally hit it. The second thing is, I don't understand why Panasonic doesn't include the vlog profile with the camera itself. I don't understand why it has to be a separate purchase. Sony includes the S-Log in their cameras. I don't see why Panasonic just doesn't include the vlog in it as well. I think that's something that would be really nice to just have already included in the camera without having to spend an additional $100 to get it. And the third thing is that you can't set the back dial to change any settings. You can basically use it to scroll through menus and preview pictures when you're in image preview, but you can't use it to change the ISO or the white balance, and you can't set it to pretty much change anything. It'd be really nice to set it to change some settings such as ISO. So that pretty much brings me to the end of the review. I just wanted to share some final closing thoughts on the camera. Overall, I think this is an excellent camera. It offers an abundance of features and is very versatile thanks to its ability to deliver both excellent stills and video. It offers great ergonomics and performance in a small lightweight package that I can definitely see myself using this camera for a lot of different situations, and I can also see myself getting a lot of use out of it. So that's it for my review. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did like it, be sure to hit that like button. Be sure to subscribe to this channel and share this video with your friends if they're interested in this camera as well. If you have any questions or comments or would like to offer some feedback, go ahead and leave that down in the comments below. I would love to hear from you guys. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.